What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to some more Marvel Snap. Merry Christmas Eve to all those who celebrate. Happy holidays in general. Today I wanted to get together and talk about some balance changes I think that need to be made to the game. I wouldn't say this is an exhaustive list, or every card that I think could use a slight tweak or bump down. This is just kind of the main ones that come to my head. So I think I got, what do we got? 1, 2, 3 nerfs, 1 watch list, 2 buffs, and even some of the nerfs are, arguably mechanical changes. So the first one we should start with is the major elephant in the room, is our man, Leader. And there's been a lot of discussion about this card I've seen online, and a lot of it I think is really quality discussion. Some of the most common nerf suggestions I've seen for him are to copy the cards without existing buffs or without activating their abilities, so kind of plain copies. And I do agree that would be a good change. The only thing with that change is I don't think it matches the current mechanics or ways you expect cards to work in this game. So it could work if they add more text that say like add plain copies, but then you have to introduce what a plain copy is in this game. It's still doable, don't get me wrong. But I think Snap has gone the route of elegant, simpler changes, fewer words, easier to understand. So as much as I think that's probably one of the better nerfs overall, I don't think we're necessarily going to see that. I think the most likely thing that you'll see up front would be to give this the negative treatment, probably drop it down to 1 power or 0 power, and then if it doesn't do enough, they might drop it down to -1. Another thing I'd like to consider, and I would need more data in terms of if one route or the other is better, I think considering having Leader copy the first card your opponent played. Potentially, if that's even too weak, you could do first card played per location. I think that's still elegant / easy to understand enough, but also gives your opponent power to play around it if you're playing multiple cards. And it would also leave Leader kind of intact for some of the main uses in terms of if I know you're playing a big 6-cost card, I'll play Leader to copy that and then get a little extra power. So like that use case would remain unchanged. However, if I'm playing like a big 5-cost card, I could play a 1-cost first to kind of disrupt your Leader, and then play my 5-cost afterwards. That one would need some access to data that I don't have from the developers, but that is a route that I would consider if I was in charge of this change. But I think by far the most likely nerf is the Mr. Negative treatment, but there are a couple other options for this guy. The next one is a card that we know is on the watch list as well, and it is our man Galactus. Galactus is actually a tough one though, because you can't really change Galactus too much without almost redesigning the card. The reason why I say that is, obviously, the effect is really powerful. It's iconic in this game at this point. It is one of the most recognizable effects in Snap. So you can't really tweak that effect too much without redesigning the card. And I'm going to harp on this a lot. Developers seem to favor smaller, simpler, elegant changes to cards. One change that I did see floated on Twitter, I think it might have been from Willow, it might have been from somebody else, changing this to a 5-cost card and changing the unrevealed to being destroy all locations next turn. So you would play him on 5, kind of telegraph that, hey, all the other locations are getting destroyed next turn, play your cards here, turn 6. And then they would go ahead and destroy it after turn 6 at that point. So I think that is interesting. I think that it does fall in the lines of simple and easy to understand changes, so I think that one is actually one that they might consider. But this one also could just be in line for a simple power reduction. They could drop it to 2 or 1. I think the tougher thing with Galactus is ramping him out early. Obviously, playing Galactus on turn 6 I think is incredibly balanced, and it probably feels bad to have happen to you, but Galactus decks, once you play one a couple times, it becomes very obvious that they're setting up a Galactus. So I think the turn 6 Galactus isn't really the concern. It's more of the wave / Psylocke Electro Galactus coming out on turn 4. Destroy the board, then you're playing Null and death and all these other things that makes your lane kind of insurmountable. I think that's also probably a point at Null and Death, which I do have Death on here to talk about at one point. But another change you could consider to Galactus is destroying locations not counting as destroying cards. And this could potentially be a mechanical change to Yondu and what's the location? Lamentis. If all of those don't count as destroying cards, and only cards actively destroy on the board count as destroying cards, I think that brings Galactus way more in line. Because then your Death play wouldn't work, your Null play wouldn't work. That's a more mechanical change, but I think it is a mechanical change that at some point we need to talk about in the game. We're seeing Null kind of have super high power outputs in specific scenarios. Death's kind of been a constant since people unlocked her in this game. I think it's going to have to be something you look at just because, like I said, Lamentis and Galactus, they make what should be hard to achieve effects a little bit too easy. So I would not mind seeing what constitutes a destroyed card change as a Galactus nerf, but I do think the most likely thing is probably a power drop for now. The next card I want to talk about, it's really a mechanical change, but it touches a couple cards. One card that it touches is Death. One card that it touches is She-Hulk. And I guess that the main card that I would say this would be a nerf for, although like I said, I believe this should be a mechanical change to the game, it would technically be a wave nerf. And my suggestion is cost set effects. So right now the main one is wave. Cards that set a cost of a card should supersede all other aura effects from cards. What I mean by that is wave's effect triggers, all cards in hand cost 4. I think that should supersede things like Death's cost reduction, She-Hulk's cost reduction. I think there's an argument to be made about Sarah's cost reduction as well, although Sarah's on the board, so I think that one is more debatable. Things like Elysium or what is it, Dream Dimension, that give you +1 cost to your cards. I think anything in play on the board, you can make an argument should affect your hand over Wave's ability, but I think Wave's ability should supersede everything else at a minimum, meaning if you play Wave, you're not getting a 0 cost or a 2 cost Death because you destroyed 2 cards. I think that is a good change for the health of the game as a whole, and it also will mean that they don't need to be as super careful printing cost reduction cards in the future, especially mainly big, like expensive ones. Because right now I think Wave was designed to do one of 2 things. Either cheat out a card early, like a 6 cost on turn 4, or to counter more zoo swarm strategies where you make everything cost 4, they can only play 1 card on turn 6. Really is just supposed to be favoring playing a big heavy deck. What's happened with Wave is she does both of those things, but also when used with mana reduction, you are essentially doing all of those things yourself. So you are becoming the swarm deck, and you are still cheating out really big things that you're not supposed to be cheating out that many. Like with a Wave, you could be playing, you know, 2 Death, 2 She-Hulk, and something else on turn 6, or something wild. Like, there's just, it's too much power output, and I know that's like a super high roll I just mentioned. But even just the typical playing Death plus a 6 cost, because Death only costs 2 and you didn't really have to destroy any cards to make that happen. I think that is a mechanic as a whole that's going to need to be looked at, basically for the longevity of the game. Wave's cost reduction is just going to be keep causing smaller problems. I don't think this is the strongest thing in the game right now. I just think it's something that needs to be looked at as a whole. So that's my 3 main nerfs I think we need to look at, and even the Wave thing, I'm calling it a nerf because it does make Wave weaker, but I think that's a mechanical change. And the Galactus one, you could nerf him or you could make a mechanical change. I got a couple buffs to talk about and then 1 watch list for the future. First buff collector's tokens. Give us more. That's only half joking. But I have a video on my thoughts on the progression system as a whole. Go check that out if you have time. But my first actual buff I think that should be made is to our guy Groot. I think actually almost all of the Guardians are in a pretty decent spot, and you could probably lump in Drax with this as well. So you can say Drax and Groot here. But Star-Lord, Rocket, and Gamora are all really solid. Groot and Drax just don't really hit the mark. They're really falling in no man's land. Groot could be a pretty simple change. I think if you either made Groot a 3-4 that gets +3, or a 3-3 that gets +4, either one works. But if you did that to Groot, I think he would become much more playable. I think a 3-4 would be quite nice, actually. I think Groot definitely needs a buff, and we could loop Drax in with him. I honestly forgot about Drax when I even made this list until I said the Guardians out loud. Drax, I mean, 4 for 8 isn't terrible. I mean, it's like crossbone stats, but I think a 4-5 that gets +4 or a 4-4 that gets +5 really makes him that much more tempting. I think Drax would become quite playable with really just one more power. So that's my main first change. My next change is another more simple one. And like I said, there's a whole bunch of cards that you could do minor tweaks like this to. These are just the ones I want to see the most. Is Nick Fury. I think Nick Fury should go to 8 power. The 3 random 6-cost cards, I don't want to say they're inconsequential. They're good for collector. They're good for, you know, a couple things like that. But in general, if you're looking at what it takes to be a competitive 5-cost, you've got Spider-Woman, who has the same exact power, but it potentially can reduce your opponent's power by up to 4, not counting Wong or Odin. So that's really a 11 power net swing for Spider-Woman. Whereas Nick Fury is, if you have collector, it could be a 10 power swing, and that requires other card. Black Bolt is 5 for 8, and he's still not that playable. He's better, but still not that playable because his effect isn't as good. Jane Foster, 5 for 8, is playable because of her ability. Arrow, 5 for 8, is playable because of her ability. So I just think that giving Nick Fury an additional 1 power at least gives you some reasons to think about running him. Like Black Panther without buffs or Odin Wong is 8 power. I think Nick Fury, at least, you can consider him a bit more at 8 power. Probably still not enough, but it's something I'd like to change, especially with Nick Fury being a signature card, the first signature card released in the game. I think that should be something they're thinking about. And then the final buff that I wanted to talk about, and this is also kind of a mechanical change, but I'm going to consider it a buff because it would make the card better, is Absorbing Man. So Absorbing Man has on reveal, if the last card you played has an on reveal ability, this card copies it. I think this should be changed to work with Wong. Now, the reason why it doesn't, and this is my best guess, is this on reveal triggers. You copy the new cards on reveal and you trigger it. I think the game probably recognizes if this were to then activate a second time, Absorbing Man would copy himself, which would then kind of trigger an endless loop. So there would probably be some programming considerations as to why he doesn't currently work with Wong. But in my head, I think what should work is kind of like how Mystique works, where after Mystique's on reveal activates, she becomes an ongoing card, no longer an on reveal card. I think Absorbing Man's on reveal should just become whatever that last on reveal was. So it should work something along the lines of Absorbing Man triggers, let's say he copies Hazmat, triggers that Hazmat ability, then the check happens on Wong, and I'm getting kind of technical here, I can't help it, but the check happens on Wong, Wong says, was that an on reveal card that gets played, trigger it again, comes back to Absorbing Man has Hazmat's ability, it just triggers that again. So this is kind of a mechanical change, but I think it would make Absorbing Man a lot more fun and a lot better. So I definitely would like to see that change put into place. And then finally, I have one card that's on a watch list in terms of, I don't think this card is too good, but I think once Leader is toned down a bit, and Galactus is toned down a bit, and other things are toned down, this is going to be the next top thing that people say feels bad to lose to, and I'd argue this actually feels worse than most of those right now, but it's also relatively balanced, so it's kind of an interesting situation to be in terms of balance and making decisions. But that card, if I can find her, there you go. card I think we're talking about here is Arrow. Arrow is a 5-cost, 8-power. Move all enemy cards played this turn to this location. I don't think you should change her power, but I think at some point the devs are going to wind up looking at the on-reveal ability. Arrow does very much follow a similar play pattern to Leader in terms of get a lead, play this on turn 6, kind of try and guarantee your victory at that point. And I think Arrow is a much more balanced version of Leader. But it's one of those things that feels really bad to lose to, and I could see this becoming public enemy number 1 once a couple other cards are out of the way. So the reason why I say watch list is I wouldn't change Arrow quite yet. I would make some other changes first and see how things play out. But like if I made all other changes that were mentioned in this video, Arrow would be the number 1 card that I'm watching data on as a developer to figure out like what is the net change of these effects on this card, how does it affect the game as a whole, what are the win rates, also what is player sentiment, because even if Arrow had like a 10% win rate, if her play rate is like 90% and everybody hates having Arrow played against her, it still warrants a nerf. As weird as that sounds, even if a card is underpowered, if the play rate is high enough and people hate playing against it enough, it still warrants a change in the world of development, regardless of the power level. And I know that's kind of a weird thing to hear, but it's the truth. So yeah, those are the balance changes I would like to see in the game moving forward. Let me know what you guys think down below in the comment section. Definitely want to see some conversations or get involved in some conversations with you all on kind of my thoughts and my list. Let me know what you think. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Consider subscribing if you're new to the channel, and we'll see you guys next time. Peace.